SGS in brief, SGS is a world-leading inspection, verification, testing, and certification company and has been recognized as the global leader, the global benchmark for quality and integrity. We have over 99,000 employees, which covers about 2,600 offices around the world, covering 11 industries. And SGS was founded in 1878, and through the mid-20th century, they diversified into inspection, testing, and verification services. As of 1981, they were listed on the Swiss Stock Exchange, and today there's over 140 years in business. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Adam. Adam, take it away.
Thank you, John. I'll tell you just a little bit in brief that sustainability has been, continues to be embedded throughout SGS as a company. It's a core business principle from the top CEO down to every employee. We get trained on it, and yeah, you won't find it missing anywhere when you hear SGS. We've got 25 plus years of sustainability experience being involved in the creation. A lot of these frameworks and standards, we're often sit on working groups, or we test and become a verifying body for the standards and frameworks that come out. And that is one of the reasons why we continue to be recognized as a sustainability leader by every rating agency that our clients also tend to get rated by. And we take great pride in that. And you see a nice list there. Specifically with pharma, it's important just to see the broader context of a huge company. We have an entire health science network across the globe with analytical testing facilities, clinical research facilities, formulation and CDMO facilities. Here's just a snapshot of where we do business, the kind of labs and testing facilities we have. And that's why SGS helps companies from the discovery phase all the way through development and post-marketing. So we've got an incredible array of talent and services that we provide in this field. And today we're going to be focused on very specifically disclosures with ESG and sustainability, but it comes informed by quite a bit of work. Really quick, one question to get a sense of where people are. Has your organization published an annual ESG or sustainability report? So I'm going to hit that quiz up for you. I will select yes. SGS has been doing this. We actually have an integrated report, and we're one of the first companies in our industry to do that. But if you've gone through this process, it's a really good indicator that you've put in a lot of legwork, because just the process of collecting all that data, organizing it in a fashion that you are then confident enough to publish to the broader world is a good indicator that you've got a substantial amount of work in place, or at least the skeleton and the framework in place for a good program company-wide. And so that's why it's a good thing to just take stock of, see if that's something that you have done. But I'll give you a few more seconds while people answer that question. For us, it's a yes. It's completely fine if you don't know. Typically, it would be something you would publicize internally to your company employees, but it is common. We'll find that some folks just haven't seen it. It could be an ESG report that's integrated into your financial statements. And so in that case, it might not happen. So we've got a nice little balance here. No, I don't knows, but that's very good. Today, we're going to talk about, just make sure we're talking about the same things. ESG and sustainability, I will say, get used by different people in different contexts poorly sometimes, and it causes a lot of confusion. So what we're going to, just so you're clear on what we're talking about today, ESG in its purest sense simply means non-financial reporting, or what I like to say is extra financial reporting. They're anything that is environmentally, socially, or governance related that is material to a business. This term came out of the public sphere. Publicly traded companies have been using this for decades. It's not new. It's not a fad. And so it purely just means non-financial reporting. Anything that's material to your business that you don't put a dollar sign or a currency behind, that would be non-financial reporting. So that is what ESG is. It's financial materiality at its purest. ESG has a long history. I would say you've got at least 70, 80 years since we've seen the financial industry have this historical cost accounting for accuracy shift. And what happened was the Great Depression, and a ton of concerns in the financial sector have led, long story short, to management discussion sections and a lot of non-financial reporting, and specifically social and environmental externalities were identified by investors and banks to say, these are the things that should be looked at as material to your business. So that's where E, S, and G came from. It is not new, but what is new is that since like the mid 1990s, there were very little tools and consistency in reporting those. And so the business community was saying, if we need to report these things that they're material to our business, we need some help. And so the environmental and social movements themselves, while not the same thing as ESG, did provide some help. And there were, since the early mid 90s, there've been a steady buildup of business tools and standards to help companies report on E, S, and G criteria. And I would say some of the big things to look at what's shifted over the last 20 to 30 years is that 90% of the S&P 500 market value of companies is now in intangibles, which is goodwill, brand identity, intellectual property, things that some of those are a little more nebulous. And the fact that there's that much value locked up there versus, it used to be about 80% tangible, which is just physical things, vehicles, factories, equipment, product inventory, that there's a huge concern of negative PR, being seen for doing the wrong things, losing your social license to operate, sometimes people say. So there's a huge shift in making sure that people protect that market value. And this is where sometimes it gets confusing, but there's a very clear difference between ESG in its actual definition, which is financially material to the business. So if you look at this common term, it's not what some people try to say it is purely what are environmental and social issues, and do they have an impact on the business's profits or bottom line. That is what ESG is. It's pure financial materiality. It's in the short, medium, and long term. So there are people looking into the future of what will it impact you. But then impact materiality is often equated with sustainability. That's not forgetting the financial materiality, but it's what is the business's impact on social and environmental issues, negative and positive. And that's where the more like good for the planet, good for society types of conversations come. But that is not what ESG is at its core. ESG is a financial materiality metric. There's a pretty clear also delineation if you look at the frameworks and standards that are out there, where the integrated reporting, SASB, TCFD, all combined into the Value Reporting Foundation and have since been absorbed into IFRS, which is the global standard, except for in the US and China, for financial reporting. And they came out with this S1 and S2 standard last June, that all of those are investor and financial bank-driven financial materiality ESG standards. Whereas if you look at sustainability and more of the kind of public sphere, like good for you, good for the planet, GRI is really focused on that double materiality, and so is the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Those are very like governmental, municipality focused, and so there's a clear difference between the guiding principles that are out there. And so one question I like to ask, just given the sense for ESG and sustainability, what trend does your business see in stakeholder expectations? So what are your stakeholders, your customers, your regulators, your internal employees asking for? Do you see no change in expectations for ESG and sustainability performance? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Because that's really at the end of the day what matters for you. I would say, and you'll hear us say this over and over, adopting some off-the-shelf solution or strategy, especially just because somebody else is doing it, is not the right way to go. Materiality is a very, it's regionally specific, it's industry specific, but materiality is company specific. And so your business model, your business structure, whether you're private, public, the size, all that matters, and it determines what's material for your company. So we would never say all companies should be doing X, Y, and Z, but it is important to know what your pressures are and what are the business drivers for your company. So give it a few more seconds. Increasing, decreasing, or no change in expectations for you. And we've got no change, some increasing, some decreasing, and that's absolutely important for you to know, because that will determine what you're going to do next. So let's look at what some of those pressures would be for the pharma industry. Some of it's a little generic, but some of it's very specific, and I'll give you some really clear examples. Here in North America, regulation doesn't exist. In the US and Canada, Mexico, most regulations for ESG broadly, covering environmental, social, and governance, is global. IFRS S1 I mentioned rolled out, and that's effective this year. So at the end of this year, if you're following IFRS, you're going to have to report according to S1 or disclose and justify why you're not. And then for Europe, the European Union, the CSRD is really driving a lot more aggressive, almost like GRI equivalent reporting. And so if you're international and doing business in Europe, you need to look at CSRD as well. But in the US and Canada, where we focus, greenhouse gas regulation does exist, and it's continuing to increase. And it's just one environmental topic, but is the global priority for a lot of regulatory bodies. So global IFRS S2 is a climate specific standard. So that's really important to look at. But Canada specifically, a long time has had, like most countries, a greenhouse gas reporting program for the heaviest industrial emitters. They now have a federal supplier rule. It's really for some of the very, very large suppliers. And there's a new rule out there for FRFIs, the federally regulated financial institutions, banks and insurance companies, that has passed, but it's being flushed out. So a lot of banks and insurance companies are going to have to look at their clientele, and they're going to have to report. So if you're borrowing from one of these larger banks, you're going to have to report your greenhouse gas emissions to them because of what's called financed emissions. And so it's a scope 3 emission category for banks and financial institutions. USA has a very similar, but slightly different, which I'll explain. Similarly, we have a greenhouse gas reporting program for our largest heavy industry emitters. FDIC guidance to our large banks came out in October, which is very similar, climate risk. And then we have proposed rules, which are similar but go a little bit further. The SEC climate rule, which has not been the final publication yet, I think because of the, we also have some California rules, SB 261 and 253, or 253 and 261, sorry. But we have an SEC climate rule that is proposed that would have all publicly traded companies reporting the greenhouse gas emissions, as well as a federal supplier rule that is in comment right now, that all a much larger than number of companies than in Canada would be federal suppliers, so the government would have to start reporting their greenhouse gas emissions. So that regulation, in summary, is global, but for greenhouse gas, there's very specific local regulation here in North America to consider. Then you have the ESG ratings. So these publicly traded companies are really affected the most by this, but you have your investors and creditors using these ESG ratings and scores to make buy, sell, lend decisions. The most common ones are Dow Jones Sustainability Index, MSCI, ISS, and Sustainalytics. Those are all algorithms. They're also the target of some court cases to say, hey, transparency is needing to increase. If these are being used to score and evaluate companies, then the companies need to have transparent access to how they were scored, what is the algorithm, and guidance on how to improve their scores. So that is I would say, one of the benefits of what's called the ESG backlash. It's mostly a course correction and an improvement on what has already existed, but it's closing up some of these loopholes that rightfully so people are criticizing. And the successful court cases are the ones that are improving this mechanism, which are the ESG ratings. That has also led to what I would consider soon going to be the bigger driver. We're seeing the second wave, or supply chain customers pushing into their supply chain saying, we're these large brands, we request our suppliers start giving us ESG data because we can't really disclose and track for traceability and supply chain management how well we're doing, and because we don't have visibility into the impacts in our supply chain. The two most common platforms, are the largest and fastest growing platforms, are CDP. Again, that's specifically for climate change. But there are supply chain members that are signing up publicly and saying, we will ask all of our suppliers, which can be hundreds or it can be thousands of companies, often small, medium-sized, privately held, to report through CDP. So there's a large influx of greenhouse gas reporting starting to happen. And also EcoVadis is much larger because it has a much larger scope, but they have over 100,000 organizations, many of them small, medium-sized companies, privately held, but they're reporting much broader than greenhouse gas emissions. They're doing all kinds of environmental and social and governance disclosures. There are also these EcoVadis sector initiatives, specifically with biotech and pharma. You've got the Responsible Health Initiative, RHI, and you've got all these other big brands as well saying we're going to ask that all of our suppliers report through EcoVadis. So again, you're getting hundreds, if not thousands, of small, medium-sized companies signing up and reporting for the first time through things like CDP and EcoVadis. So just self-promotion, we have a really great workshop where we help people with things like the EcoVadis workshop. We also have a CDP workshop, and just over 4 hours, we technically walk you through the whole thing because there is a little bit of point chasing. You really need to understand the mechanism and how to report well, and then there's a performance aspect of it, but a lot of it we find our customers and clients can improve their score just by getting better at reporting. Much broader, further down the line, fourth and fifth, you see ESG coming from consumers. If you're a consumer, directly to consumer, I won't belabor this point because it's a little smaller, but consumer pressure is really growing, as well as employees wanting companies to do better. I think in the talent wars, definitely not from, hourly jobs and manual labor, but if you're looking at some highly skilled, difficult to fill positions in leadership, this really becomes much more of a concern, and recruiting the top talent. Companies typically need to have a good sustainability record. So those are some options. They might not be the only drivers, but these are the biggest ones. And I would say, again, I'll repeat, what is your number one driver? That's how you're going to build your strategy. That's when you'll find out what really matters to you. But you typically will have a mix of 1, 2, or 3 of these to differing varying degrees, but you need to know what your number one driver is. So for ESG and sustainability, is it regulatory? Is it you're a publicly traded company and you have these ratings, or you're a small privately held company, but now you're getting into a rating system like EcoVadis and CDP for the first time? Is it supply chain customers? I'm going to put customers for us just because we're business to business, and essentially we just help clients do this, but you could put all 5 of these for SGS. Or if you're a consumer company or an employee, maybe your employees are really pushing you for it. And if you have an other, I would just say that's wonderful. I'd love to hear it in the Q&A box. Just type in what that other is. But as I said, it's just really good to know what your number one driver is, because that's going to determine where you put your effort, and where you put your money, and where you develop a strategy to make sure that your ESG and sustainability program is a success. Give it a few more seconds, then I will click through. All right, see, majority regulatory pressure and ESG ratings. The good thing about those is they are the most clear. I think that's wonderful, because if you look at supply chain customers, consumers, employees, often that requires some stakeholder engagement where you need to go out and have conversations with people to really dig in and find out what they need. Today, we're going to talk about not only regulatory, which we've mentioned, but ESG ratings. We'll also talk about standards and frameworks and give you some real specifics. So that's what we're going to talk about next. As a snippet, I'll just mention, we're going to talk about the outside in. So what is the marketplace and external agencies saying that companies in the pharmaceutical industry should be reporting on? And they all have some version of a multi-stakeholder involvement process that is fairly transparent. And so we're able to go look at all these different frameworks, standards, and rating agencies and see, so like MSCI, EcoVadis, we've got the SASB standards, you've got the rating platforms, and there's a lot more industry-specific initiatives with industry associations as well. But now we're just going to dive into some very, very specific topics, and I have these in order of the most pressing that we're seeing the most weight put on. And so first, it's governance and ethics. And so you'll find this across industries, the main thing people want to know is, are you doing anything about it? And what's your structure to look at these environmental and social issues? So governance is typically, what is your structure, and is leadership in the company actively aware of and looking at risks and opportunities with environmental and social? That's the G is usually just the governance of your ESG, but it's things like, what is your structure for managing and reporting? What are the names and qualifications of those leaders? Do you have a stakeholder engagement process? used to identify those risks, which I just mentioned. Some of these other entities do not just give you clear guidance. You have to go out and engage with them and learn what their priorities are. Do you list, describe, and have a management approach for all of your material topics that you've deemed material to the company? Are you certified to a governance standard like 27001, ISO 37001? Tier 1 suppliers, are they certified to those same governance standards, and how many by type? What are your monetary losses of things like false marketing claims, corruption, or bribery? And do you have a code of ethics for things like off-label product use, interaction with healthcare professionals? So again, these are governance issues, but they're specific to ESG. And then diving into actual topics, things like a social topic, product safety and quality comes up all the time. It's not only your management of your quality and patient safety clinical trials, your inspection results and any remediation regulatory actions, legal monetary losses from clinical trials, products listed in public safety or public medical product safety or adverse event alert databases. Again, certification to quality standards. Standards will come up over and over again and getting certified, but ISO 9001, but also ICH Q7 API, XCPACT. And then are your tier 1 suppliers certified to these same standards? How many by type? Definitely fatalities associated with products, recalls, products accepted for take back, reuse, or disposal, and then any enforcement actions with violations related to GMP. So product safety and quality, again, makes sense. Governance makes sense. Now you dive into additional product safety and quality. So traceability of products in the supply chain to prevent counterfeiting, process for alerting customers and business partners of counterfeit product risks, any actions that led to raids, seizures, arrests, criminal charges for counterfeiting, and then facilities in the RX 360 audit program or equivalent for supply chain and ingredients, as well as tier 1 suppliers, facilities in the RX 360 audit program or equivalent. So lots of product safety and quality. Again, this is why they're material topics to the business. They're not kind of that far, they're not wild, crazy things. They're very specific industry given by, oh, something came up in this. I apologize for the look of this. One of the slides sort of lost its formatting. So for human capital development, it's talent recruitment, retention efforts for scientists, research and development staff, voluntary and involuntary turnover for all levels of employees, certification, again, to a standard, but this time a health and safety standard, like ISO 45001 is the most common. And then do you have tier 1 suppliers also certified to health and safety standards? How many, by what type? Access to healthcare. So this is more of a social issue, but it's also a marketing and how big of a market can you serve? So promotion of access for priority diseases and countries per Access to Medicine Index, products on the WHO list of pre-qualified medicinal products, your annual change in weighted average list price and net price across product portfolio, annual change in list price and net price of product with largest increases, and patents, capacity development, which is typo here, and product donations. So these are all about who can access your pharmaceutical and medicine and drugs and who can't. And so this is really about reach. Environmental, you're getting further down the list, but toxic waste and emissions. Those disclosures include incidents of noncompliance with air quality permits, standards and regulations, hazardous, toxic, or carcinogenic waste and emissions, certification, again, to standards that come up over and over, but environmental management systems, like ISO 14001 is the most common, and then any tier 1 suppliers certified to those environmental standards, again, how many by type. Further down the list for environmental, water management comes in, again, from a production standpoint, often where you're located. This is a very regional issue as well. So it's water-related risks and opportunities and what management systems you have in place, the water intensity of your operations, but also incidents of non-compliance with water quality permits, standards and regulations that affects your ability to function and stay open, and then water withdrawn and consumed in regions with high or extremely high baseline stress. If you haven't paid attention, there's a lot of water scarcity in the world, and it's increasing all the time. And so just your ability to continue to access water, especially if it's necessary for production. And then chemical safety, further down the list, but harmful chemicals in your portfolio and efforts to develop less harmful alternatives, exposure to existing and future regulations on chemical safety, and then climate risks. Pharmaceuticals, kind of surprisingly, usually climate is further up the chain of like priorities, but it's not necessarily an industry that's under intense scrutiny as something like mining or oil and gas could be. But still, the disclosures people look for are climate risks. Often those are TCFD, that's a framework specific to climate risk, where they look at governance, strategy, risks, and metrics around climate. Also greenhouse gas emissions and percent. So what are your actual greenhouse gas emissions and what percent of those are under a regulatory scheme? Again, there's a lot of regulation around the world, and greenhouse gas is the #1 regulated ESG issue globally. And so they want to know, are you subject to these different regulatory schemes and which ones? It's typically measured in things called scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions, as well as often you're looking for verification or third-party assurance of those emissions. So folks using like Greenhouse Gas Protocol or ISO 14064-3 as an assurance standard to say, yes, we've had it. Not only are we disclosing, but we have a third party who has verified those numbers. If you need any help with that, one of the things that we do very well, besides being a third-party assurance company, is we have trainings. We train ourselves, our competitors, our clients. We're just a very good training house, all the way up to if you want to become a lead verifier of greenhouse gas emissions inventories, which is what we do for a living. We train ourselves and other people. And that next set is coming up in June. We also have private trainings available. But one thing to ask is, given that I just ran through a long list and I talked pretty quickly, but all of those are things that would be looked at in a formal materiality assessment to say, for our company, now that we know that these are all possible disclosures, which ones are the best for us, which ones are the priority for us, which it usually looks at regionally, industry specific, and what are the framework standards, rating agencies. Sometimes the formal materiality assessment will go beyond that desk research and have stakeholder engagement, especially if you are in Europe or trying to abide by the CSRD, you're doing business in Europe. So the question is, have you done any form of a formal materiality assessment that helps you? It doesn't answer the question for you, but it certainly gives you a lot of guidance on what should your material topics be, what priorities should they be listed in, and why, which is the most important thing. But have you done that for yourselves or for your company? I'll say yes. For SGS, we publish that as well in our sustainability report, but it really often what you'll see is what's called the materiality matrix is a very common visual. Companies will show this 4x4 matrix, or essentially an XY axis, and from the bottom left is the least material, and at an angle up to the top right is the most material, and those are usually graphed against important to the business and important to stakeholders. And it's a pretty simple chart, but it's not a simple exercise, and that's why a lot of folks have not actually conducted one yet. But I'll give you a few more seconds to submit that. And we've got some yeses, some nos, but if you haven't done it, I highly recommend it. If you're not subject to CSRD, or if you are, we can scale that up and down for you, but SGS does provide what we call a gap analysis, because sometimes it's not a full materiality assessment that would be compliant with the CSRD. And we do that so that it's more cost effective for smaller companies that don't actually need the Lamborghini. They're happy with the smaller model. What's coming next, because all we've done really is look at the outside in and what are these external agencies saying, is that we are currently conducting actual industry research. We have a webinar coming out on August 21st, but Harsh Vasoya on my team and myself and our marketing team, we look at the top 100 companies per industry. We're doing pharma right now. And we report back and what are the actual behaviors. So these are what the frameworks and standards and rating agencies are asking for, but what are the actual reporting behaviors of the top 100 companies, and what are those trends, so that you can get basically a jump start and say, okay, maybe I'll just look and see what's happening. I want to be competitive. I don't have pressure from a standard or a framework, but we're going to show you what framework, standards, and rating agencies they're using and trying to appease, what their material ESG topics and priorities are. Are they setting KPIs and targets? And then do they have third-party certification, verification, and or assurance? So again, I invite you to check back in August and stay tuned, because we will have that basically the second part of this series on pharma, which is what is the actual behavior today. Why people get third-party assurance, the tangible benefits is One, internal confidence for your own investments and strategies. You're going to use this information to make decisions about your internal strategy, so you want to believe in it. Also meet regulatory requirements, improve ESG ratings and scores, and then improve external confidence for your customers and your stakeholders who might be asking specifically for assurance. And if you're not familiar, this is the simplest version. Greenhouse gas on the top, but ESG and sustainability is very similar. You can and should, we always recommend, get training. When you're executing, you might have accounting help software or materiality assessments and software, but then you can do things like our spot check that are more cost effective. They're not full assurance. You do not get a certificate or a statement of opinion, but you can have a third party do what's called a gap analysis of your greenhouse gas emissions or a pre-assurance of your sustainability report before you do something, which is typically starts with a limited assurance and then goes to a reasonable higher rigor. But that's an actual accredited service typically. You can have unaccredited depending on your requirements, but there's a lower level of rigor to limited. It often can all be done without a on-site visit, but we still recommend it. It's the highest value, or your full report. So you can do just your greenhouse gas emissions inventory and get assurance, or you can assure a number of KPIs. We've done as little as 2, as high as 27. Or the full report. You could say this is a GRI compliant report or a SASB compliant report. Those are the most aggressive forms of assurance that you can do. But just to give you a sense of what that kind of framework and how it looks, pans out over time when you're developing your programs. And then real quick, just to get a sense, have you gotten any third-party assurance? Now that you know what it is, you can do internal. It's very common, and you should always have someone on your finance team do an internal assurance or an internal review of your data itself, and make sure that you're reporting data that you have confidence in. But you can just do greenhouse gas emissions. That's very common. We'll see people just starting with greenhouse gas. Some people do multiple ESG. Some people, this is the most common, I'll say in Europe, it's very common, but do a full GRI compliant or SASB compliant report. Or you just say, no, we haven't done any external third-party assurance to this date, or you don't know. Typically, how you'll find out is you have a published report, and somewhere in that index or in the back, or even right next to the KPI, there will be some sort of graphic or a check mark that says, this data has been assured by a third party. And often, not only us, but our competitors, your disclosure statement of opinion or your certificate or whatever was issued is actually printed and included in that report. So you'll have your statement of assurance with you in that publication. So I'll give you a few more seconds to chime in. Say yes, GHG emissions only, yes, multiple, and then a couple no's. So thank you. That is not, you're not alone. It's very common what we see. Again, we do KPI verification and assurance here. It's a core of our business. We are a third-party assurer and a verification body. And so as you start to say, like, what do I want to do next with this information? We really like to show you just what's that cycle look like. So every company that we work with, we tell them there's clear stages or steps in this sustainability cycle or ESG cycle that you get more mature with every stage. You should always build awareness. You should then, after you build some awareness on the issue, set your priorities. This is where the materiality and the stakeholder assessments happen. Then you set your strategy. Once you have a very clear understanding of why you would focus on certain priorities versus others, then you would set your vision, KPIs, goals, and plans based on that information. You would execute, try to make improvements, and then choose at some time to report. Typically, you're going to report on your management approach as well as performance over time. And that first time you go through this cycle might take a couple of years, but you almost inevitably will get on a 1-year cycle because you're going to have a 1-year annual report. And that typically is the output or deliverable that most companies shoot for. And then you will not want to redo these completely, but you want to always revisit, include building your awareness, checking your priorities to make sure they're the right ones, adjusting your strategy if necessary, executing, and then reporting. So it's a great cycle to get familiar with. The first 3 steps are really, they need to be done by internal leadership. It not only mitigates the risk of the process, you can kind of have difficult conversations behind closed doors, but it's really a company, it has to happen at a senior level. The same people setting strategy can't be the same people executing and reporting. And that's why you typically have these strategist roles filled by a senior ESG committee or something of the like, a senior sustainability committee or a whatever you want to call it. People name it different things, but it has to have senior leadership. Often it has board oversight. And you might have a specialized ESG professional in there who's sort of the coordinator of the whole effort. You often have a legal professional, your senior counsel, but it needs to be a leadership strategy that then gets executed by people who are in different roles. If you want to look at this, here's just a quick example from a pharma example. In their publicly available report, which you can click on this, you can actually go and see that they report on, this is our governance structure, this is the body, these are the individuals that are making the strategy for us. It could be even, here's their qualifications. Then they'll have a report on stakeholder engagement. This is who we reached out to. These are the types of feedback that we included in this decision-making process. And last, we determined a materiality matrix, and they'll show, often this is what we talked about, the XY axis. Everything in the top right are your priorities. Down in the bottom left tend to be less of a priority. And then you'll see the actual KPIs and your goals and targets. The rest of this very long report are going to focus on how are we measuring success in our priorities. So that's what the governance structure is meant to include. And then you get into your implementers and your reporters. Those are different people, again, and they need different kinds of training. And so that's something important that we recommend you figure out, because you came here for different reasons, but which step of this cycle fits your role the most? Are you step 1 through 3? Are you a senior leader who's setting strategy? Are you an implementer, someone who's going to own like the energy program and report up to leadership, or own the DEI program and report up to leadership, or health and safety? That's an implementer. I tend to be in the strategist sphere. And then reporter. If you're step 5, reporter is marketing, communications, investor relations, government compliance, things like that, where you're going to be talking to internal and external folks and telling your company's story and saying it needs to be very careful and thoughtful, because now there are greenwashing rules and regulations where you can get sued for misleading the public, you can get sued for misleading clients. There are risks inherent in reporting. So if you're that person, it's important to know that. So I'll give you a few seconds, but what's essential is it's not the same training, not the same individuals, not the same professional development that you would assign to these different roles. It really is a company-wide effort with multiple specialists doing different work. No reporting folks here, but a lot of strategists and implementers, which is wonderful. But that might be an opportunity. Just because they're not on the call doesn't mean they exist, but it's good to get to know those people and coordinate closely with them. Here's just a snapshot before we go to Q&A, but pharma offerings from SGS, we have training, certification, customized second-party audits, technical consulting, and lots of different certifications. We mentioned ICH, EXIPAC, WHO. We also have ISO 15378, WHO, GDP, Codex, GMP 21, and all the core ISO standards. So if you're needing help, definitely reach out. And like I said, with these different strategies, different people in different roles for strategy, execution, and reporting, we have great training. I can't say it enough. SGS is known for our assurance and our training. So if you're looking for that, we have day-long trainings that are focused on strategy, execution, and reporting. And we have a little precursor course that's just all the background information that you need to know to be successful in all the roles. But that's available on SGS Academy on our training platforms. We're growing. We've got about 2 years worth of stuff actually that we're uploading to our YouTube channel. So if you go to SGS North America YouTube channel, there's a ton of information. Subscribe this video recording will be launched to the YouTube channel, but we've got tons of great things, and we're going to add more and more. And it's a great place to just go get free training and free expertise from us. So with that being said, thank you. I open up to Q&A now. I can go back to any of the other slides. We ran through a lot of just topics and KPI disclosures, but anything you want to know about, put it in the Q&A box, and John or myself would be happy to answer.
Adam, I have a question right up front, if you can. How do clients typically come to you? What's their ask when they first get involved with their company? I realize there's a lot of different companies, but is there a common ask of you?
I mean, my team specializes in assurance, so we will either typically get two camps, one who has a very specific request, even though they might not know how to fulfill it. They'll say, hey, we're being asked to get verification for our greenhouse gas emissions, or we're being asked to report on greenhouse gas emissions. We've never done it before. Can you just tell us what you can help with? And we will just give them this similar kind of presentation, but it's where are you in the process? You know, we tell them the difference between assurance. A lot of folks don't know that you can't have your greenhouse gas or anything assured by a third party if they also helped you develop the plan or did consulting, or you can't calculate your emissions and have it assured by the same people. So we work really well with our competitors. If they helped you with your greenhouse gas emissions inventory, we can be the one who does the assurance and vice versa. But we have people with very specific say, hey, I have a stakeholder telling us we need to do this. Or we have people coming to us more for the training up front and saying, hey, greenhouse gas or ESG is getting really big. We're hearing about it. We don't have any specific requirements today, but what should we be focused on? And then we typically offer our training and say, that's a great question. There's no easy answer, but we can walk you through all the ins and outs in our training, or we can point them to our YouTube channel and say, hey, there's hundreds of hours of content here. Go check it out.
Thank you. Great answer. Appreciate that. Anybody else have any questions you'd like to ask? We'd love to help out.
In the Q&A box, or if you want to send, I don't know if you can unmute yourselves, but I don't know that we have that functionality. Summer, pretty sure we have to use the Q&A box. Well, a very deep well of experience, a wealth of information and expertise across the world that can help. And specifically today, talking about disclosure, it's really, if you're ready to disclose, these are the types of things you really want to know. You don't want to go out to market disclosing things that are out of line with the third parties, but there is a path to just justification and saying, hey, we're not reporting to this particular standard because of X, Y, and Z. But it would be a risk to go out and report on things that decades worth of kind of feedback have said, hey, this is what the industry is looking for, and these are what investors and banks are looking for. This is what the public and external parties are starting to look for because they're seeing it consistently. So it's important to just try to understand alignment. You never have to do it exactly the same, but you really want to, you would be taking a risk if you just do something completely not aligned, completely different, and doesn't look at all like what everybody else is doing in the industry. To be involved in that process would be, it just invites criticism. And now more than ever, criticism is very abundantly available.
Okay, everybody. Anything else? Well, thank you very much for attending the conference call today, the webinar. We really appreciate your attendance. And if we can ever help out, you can see the email addresses. Please either send an email to Adam or to me. We'd love the opportunity to respond. We're grateful for your attendance, and we wish you the best of day. Thank you.
Thank you.